Affairs, and we've got a full slate for us this morning. We're going to first hear from, well, let's see, before we do that, let's do a request for bill introductions. Committee, any bill introductions? I think I have two, actually. One would be RS 2598. And we've been doing a lot of these on appointments. And this is actually a constitutional amendment for appointment to AG and Secretary of State, similar to what we've been talking about with Senate Bill 249 and 254. Any questions or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that is introduced. The other is a bill, it'd be RS 2651. This may end up in education, but I thought I'd go ahead and introduce it here. This has to do with requiring critical thinking instructions within schools in Kansas. Any questions or objections to introducing that? Seeing none, that's introduced. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none. Committee, also you were sent the minutes from January 10th, 11th, 17th, and 18th, and would ask for any comments on those. And if not, we'll need a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, Senator Cluse moves to approve the minutes as sent out by the committee. Is there a second? Second by Senator Longbine. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The minutes are approved. Okay, thank you, committee. We're going to move on to an informational hearing now. Some of us here on this committee have sat through the legislative post audit on the evaluating the Department of Commerce's major economic development incentive programs, but I wanted to bring the entire committee up to speed because we are hearing the budget tomorrow for the racing and gaming and Kansas Lottery, and some of the money, some of the proceeds from those budgets goes into the Economic Development Incentive EDIF funds. And so I just thought we'd bring Josh Luthi from the Legislative Post Audit to give us that report. Josh, are you the one presenting today? Okay. So Josh, you have the floor, and thank you for coming today.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Josh Luthi, Principal Auditor at Legislative Post Audit. For those of you who haven't worked with us recently, we are legislative staff like the revisers or legislative research. We provide you all with accurate and unbiased information through our performance audit reports. Our audits are generally requested by legislators, but some, like the one I'm going to be talking about today, are required by state law. Like the chair said, today I'm going to be talking about an economic development incentive evaluation. You all should have copies of that evaluation. It is titled, Evaluating the Department of Commerce's Major Economic Development Incentive Programs. State law requires us to evaluate economic development incentive programs on a 3-year cycle as directed by our committee. This is one of the evaluations in that series. And this particular evaluation was released in early 2023. Our main objective in this audit was to determine whether Commerce's major incentive programs generated returns that exceed their costs. Those 5 major programs are HPIP, JCF, KIT, KER, and PEAK. We estimate those 5 programs will all generate total returns that exceed their costs, but they aren't likely going to generate tax revenues that will offset their costs. I'll explain what that means in a little more detail here shortly, but first, I'm going to provide a little background information about those 5 programs. The High Performance Incentive Program, or HPIP, encourages businesses to make capital investments, pay higher than average wages, and train their employees. Businesses that do these things can earn state sales tax credits or sales tax exemption certificates. The Job Creation Fund, or JCF, is Commerce's deal closing fund. It allows Commerce to make cash awards to businesses to incent them to do things like create jobs or keep their businesses in Kansas. The Kansas Industrial Training Program, or KIT, reimburses businesses for training new workers, and similarly, the Kansas Industrial Retraining Program, or KER, reimburses businesses for retraining existing workers who are at risk of being displaced. And finally, the Promoting Employment Across Kansas, or PEAK program, encourages businesses to create new jobs in Kansas. For doing this, businesses can keep or get a refund on 95% of the withholding taxes they would have otherwise paid on those new employees. All of these programs are meant to incent economic development, mainly through the creation or retention of jobs and through capital investment. So with that background information out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology, although there are a lot more details in the report itself. We selected 28 incentive projects to evaluate. For us, one project included any incentives a business received in fiscal years 17 through 21 from the 5 programs we evaluated. Some of the projects involved only one incentive program. A few of them included incentives from all 5 programs. We then used a research-based economic model to estimate the economic and fiscal effects of each project. The model estimates the economic and fiscal effects that happen because of the incentives businesses received. I'll talk a little bit more about that model here in a moment. But we use those project-level modeling results to estimate returns on investment for each of the 5 programs we evaluated. Our project selection was judgmental, so our results are not statistically projectable. But we still think our selection allowed for useful insight into each program's performance. Going back to the model then, I will say it is fairly complicated, but there are a few key inputs and outputs. The 2 key sets of inputs are the number of jobs created or retained and the amount of incentives businesses were offered and earned. For job numbers, we used a combination of the jobs businesses planned to create and the number of jobs they actually created. We assumed those jobs would exist for 20 years. For incentives, we looked both at what businesses had received to date and then estimated what they might receive in the future. The model uses these inputs and some others to estimate what we call a but-for percentage. The but-for percentage estimates the percentage of jobs a project created because of the incentives the business got. The model compares the value of the incentives the business was offered to the estimated total value of the project to estimate this percentage. Based on all that, the model then produces 2 key outputs. One output is private sector economic effects. I may also call this economic impacts. This refers to the economic effects businesses cause when they create or retain jobs. For example, creating new jobs provides workers with income. That may increase demand in the economy, which may cause other businesses to grow and hire more workers, and that may, in turn, cause population growth that could do things like lead to increased demand for real estate, which would increase property values. The other key output is public sector tax effects. This is the same thing as fiscal impacts. This output refers to the new tax revenues state and local governments collect because of the economic impacts I just discussed. For example, new jobs or higher wages mean more income tax for the state. But some of these new tax revenues may be offset if state or local governments have to spend more money to provide public services to a bigger population. That is, not all new tax revenues represent a net increase in tax revenues. You can add economic impacts and tax effects together to get a project's total returns. And just to be clear, we estimated these effects over 20 years. These things don't happen immediately. The model then multiplies those 2 outputs by the but-for percentage to estimate the economic impacts and fiscal effects that happen specifically because of the incentives the businesses got. For example, if the model estimated a but-for percentage of 10% for a project, then the model would calculate that 10% of the project's economic and fiscal impacts were due to the incentives. For the 28 projects we modeled, our but-for percentages ranged between less than 1% and about 30%. Based on our modeling results, we calculated a return on investment for each program. Our return calculations reflect how much in economic impacts and tax effects the state got for every dollar it spent on these incentives. These are indicators of program success. When returns are above $1, it means a project or program will create more in benefits than it costs the state. By contrast, if returns are below $1, then it means the project or program created less in benefits than it cost the state. And that will bring us back to the answer I gave you all earlier. As a reminder, we set out to determine whether the 5 programs generate returns that exceed their costs to the state. We estimated the 5 programs generate total returns that exceeded their costs, but the programs won't likely generate enough tax revenues to cover their costs. If you happen to be looking through the report, we summarize this information in Figure 3. That table compares the total costs of the incentive projects we modeled by program to the total returns we estimated. And what that table shows is that each project is going to create more in total benefits than it costs the state in incentives. This suggests these 5 programs are generally successful. But we can also go a little deeper. Like I said, total returns is made up of economic impacts plus tax effects. So we can look at those two things separately. Figures 5 and 6 are going to summarize those two sets of returns. Figure 5 deals with economic impact returns. As the table shows, we estimate all programs will generate more than $1 in private sector economic effects for each dollar the state spent on incentives. Since these programs are meant to incent economic development, we think these programs are generally successful. That is, they are creating more economic effects than they are costing the state. Now, the question is whether that's enough in economic effects is a question for you all as policymakers. Figure 6 deals with tax effects. And as this table shows, we estimate all the programs we evaluated will generate less than $1 in tax revenues for every dollar the state spent on these incentives. That's why we don't think these programs fully recover their cost to the state. We estimate the tax revenues these programs are responsible for aren't high enough to fully offset what the state spent on the incentive awards we modeled. Again, whether that's a problem is up to you all as policymakers. So when you're thinking about our results, there are a couple additional things to keep in mind. First, these are estimates. We're estimating what's going to happen over the next 20 years, and that required us to make some assumptions about what might happen in the future. We also don't think it's appropriate to compare programs based on the returns we estimated. The one program's returns are higher than another's doesn't mean one program is necessarily better than the other, since they're all targeted to different things. Additionally, as part of this work, we surveyed businesses to get their perspectives on the importance of economic development incentives. 30 businesses responded to our survey. One of the questions we asked those businesses was whether they would have done the same thing if they hadn't received incentives from Commerce. 11 businesses said they would have done the same thing. In other words, some businesses told us incentives didn't make any difference to their business plans. 13 businesses, however, said incentives convinced them to do bigger projects or to do their projects sooner rather than later. Only 3 businesses said they would have canceled their projects or done them in another state if they hadn't gotten incentives. So while our survey results aren't projectable, we do think that this helps shows that incentives aren't always responsible for 100% of the economic and tax effects these projects have, and that's why we think it's important to calculate those but-for percentages I talked about earlier. I'd also note that we intended to evaluate the owner's peak tax credit and an HPIP fund to assist businesses with consulting services. However, there was nothing for us to evaluate because those 2 programs have never been used. Commerce did respond to this audit. They expressed a variety of concerns about the methodologies we used. We did respond to those concerns in the report. And that will conclude my presentation. Would be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, Josh, and sorry for mispronouncing your last name.
No worries.
Luthai. Committee, any questions for Josh on this? Senator Fascadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when the individuals receive the incentives, that application, does it ask the business that they are creating, will it create jobs with a good wage and benefits? Is that factored in, Mr. Chairman?
Generally speaking, these programs will require businesses to pay workers a certain minimum wage. It's generally above the area average wage.
Any other questions? Senator Straub. Having brain cramps these days. Sorry about that.
Chair, and thank you, Josh. I was looking at the, on your presentation on page 8. That chart is somewhat difficult to read. It's just a graduate scale, a gradient scale of color, and it's, I really can't see how many, or approximately how many programs are in which counties, except it's very evident that Johnson County far exceeds the rest. So that's my question is, do we have a different map, or is there somewhere I can access the data that shows which counties each of these programs are?
Yes. If you visit our website at ks.lpa.org and you look up this report, we will have a larger version of this figure that is also, I believe, interactive, so that if you hover over the counties, it will give you more detailed information about what happened in each of them.
Any other questions? Senator Fascadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, so in your findings, your conclusion, so was it determined beneficial, the incentives, helps or hurts?
Whether these programs are successful, I think, is ultimately up to you all to decide. We're finding they create more economic effects than they cost the state. So from that perspective, they are creating economic effects, which is their intent. Whether they're creating enough of those effects, though, we cannot say.
That appears to be the conclusion, that they're not covering the cost from what you're evaluating here, correct?
Right. So if an incentive, say, costs $100,000, the tax revenues over the next 20 years aren't going to make up for the entirety of that $100,000. Whether these programs should pay for themselves is another question for you all.
That goes to an intrinsic value that's very hard to quantify, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, committee? Thank you, Josh. The reason I wanted to bring this to your attention, committee, is because we are hearing those budgets tomorrow. And I do want to consider, I hate rubber stamping budgets. We do this in other committees. And so I want to consider whether or not we should evaluate whether or not to sweep that money to the EDIF or to do something else with it as part of the budget process. And that's why I wanted to ask these questions today. Thank you, Josh. Did you have a comment, or Senator Clues?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. On page 14, where you have the little graphs there. So are we saying that the bottom then, am I reading that correct? Those are the costs, and then the top bar is the return?
Yeah. Yes, I believe the top bar is the cost and the bottom bar is the total return. That's going to be both the economic and tax effects combined.
Run that by me one more time. The top is
The top bar is the total costs, and the bottom bar is the total returns, and the total returns include both economic effects and tax effects.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Josh. That? Okay, we're going to move on then to our hearing on Senate Bill 366. And that requires county election officials, officers to receive a request for an application for an advanced voting ballot before supplying that. And I'll have Jason, our reviser, come up and give us a brief on the bill. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 366 amends one statute in the election laws 25-1122. This statute generally governs procedures for sending and receiving advanced voting ballot applications. So the voter would apply for an advanced voting ballot first with their local county election office, and then they receive the advanced voting ballot that they can then cast in accordance with other statutes. But this one deals with the applications themselves. Under current law, there were restrictions enacted back in 2021 on how a person can basically send a mailing soliciting a voter to submit an application for advanced voting ballot, and who can send those applications to registered voters. Senate Bill 366 makes a couple of changes with respect to those restrictions. And so you can flip over to pages 4 and 5 of the bill, or where the amendments appear. The first set of amendments at the bottom of page 4 deal with private individuals and organizations sending mailers to registered voters, soliciting the voter to complete an application for advanced voting ballot. Under current law, the mailing entity has to include a label and a 14-point font on the exterior of the mailing and on each page within the mailing, listing the name and contact information of the individual organization, and a clear disclaimer that the mailing is not a government mailing, but is from a private individual or organization. Senate Bill 366 tweaks that restriction a little bit. One, it reduces the font size requirement to 12-point font, which is a standard printing font size for mailers. And the second thing it does is only require this label be on either the exterior of the mailing that's sent to the voter or on at least one page that's inside the mailing that's sent to the voter rather than every page inside the mailing. Probably the more substantial amendment is on page 5. In subsection L of this statute, the current statutory language is essentially being replaced with a different restriction. The current language in the statute was subject to a court challenge after its enactment in 2021. It basically requires anybody who is going to send an application for advanced voting ballot to be either a resident or for their organization to be domiciled in the state of Kansas. There was a challenge that violated the Dormant Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. It was temporarily enjoined, and then throughout that litigation, the state conceded that that was most likely in violation of the U.S. Constitution, and so then a permanent injunction has been issued on that provision. So Senate Bill 366 would strike that language regarding residency for mailing a advanced voting ballot application, and instead inserts language directing that no county election officer or employee of a county election office can mail an application for an advanced voting ballot to a voter unless the voter has requested that application. And so they have to receive a request from the voter, then they can mail out the application for the ballot. Also, there is a requirement that the county election office cannot complete any portion of that application prior to sending it to the voter. They can't put the voter's name on it. They can't put any of the other information that has to be filled out on the application. It has to be completely blank when they mail it to the voter. That requirement also applies to private individuals and organizations who are mailing advanced voting ballot applications to voters. One final thing I just want to point out for the committee, the requirement that you receive a specific request from the voter before mailing an application only applies under this bill to the county election office and its employees. It does not apply to those private individuals and organizations that may be soliciting voters by sending mailings out to registered voters in the state of Kansas. These changes would go into effect on July 1st of this year if it's enacted, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, any questions? Senator,
Reichman.
several times. We don't, Reichman. I don't have my little thingy bobbers there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know that.
So if I understood, you said at the last that the government itself cannot send these out unsolicited, but like a political party, Republican or Democrat or whatever, they could go ahead and send out the advance ballot to people in the state. Thank you.
They don't send out the advanced voting ballot. They send out applications
okay.
for an advanced voting ballot. But yes, any voting advocacy group or potentially state party could send out applications for an advanced voting ballot to just registered voters, basically asking the voter, to submit the application back to the county election office.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Faustigo and then Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Jason, from my understanding, years ago, it was only whereas you had to contact the election office to get that advance ballot mailed to you. And then we changed the law again. And so then we started automatically receiving all these applications to request an advance ballot. So now here we are again now. And so just to clarify, you're saying that this legislation, if passed, would not or would affect those political or advocacy groups to get people registered to vote or request that advance ballot, or it would just apply to our elections commissions. And then if you could please clarify on page 1, lines 9 through 12, I'm a little confused there. when it talks about vote as a former precinct resident. Clarify that for me. Are you saying this application is only for former precinct committee people who have requested an application for an advance ballot? Or anyone, if you could clarify 9 through 12 on page 1, please. Thank you.
I think that's existing law, isn't it, Jason?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. To answer the first question, yes, this is only applicable to the county election office. To the extent your registered voters receive unsolicited advanced voting ballot applications in the mail that they haven't requested, those should only be coming from private individuals or organizations if this goes into law.
Not the election commission.
Not coming from the election commissioner, no. To answer your second question, I'm probably going to defer to one of the smarter individuals in the room to my right as to what is perhaps meant by as authorized by law to vote as a former precinct resident with respect to that language, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. I don't know if we wanted Clay to come
I don't know
up.
if you want to do it now or when Mr. Barker provides his testimony.
You can jump up there real quick. It's existing law. If Mr. Caskey or Mr. Barker wants to answer. Mr. Caskey.
Brian Caskey, Director of Elections for the state of Kansas. Would you repeat your question to make sure I've got exactly the fact pattern?
So on page 1 of the bill, lines 9 through 12, if you could clarify specifically line 11, where it says, by law to vote as a former precinct resident, an application. So how is it just pertaining to that precinct person? And since you're up there, I'm going to add in this. Does this affect the automatic advance ballots that go out to disabled individuals who have submitted that application from a doctor to, does it affect them at all? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Sure. So on question 1, Kansas has a law that if you move in the 30 days prior to the election, you can vote at your former precinct. So that former precinct language references people who've moved 30 days prior to election day. They can go back to their old precinct and vote a ballot. So that's what that references. Question 2, there is no impact on permanent advance voters with this language.
Any other questions, committee? Senator Holscher, that's right.
You remembered my name. Thank you,
Some
Mr. Chair.
days, I don't know. I've had a long week already. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. You pointed this out, and I mainly want to emphasize for people who are listening in, because I've had several questions about this bill as well as SB 343. And I just want to make clear, like I said, mainly for people listening in, that this is the one that is more targeted to county election officers versus 343 is the other one that is a broader bill in terms of who it affects.
That's correct. This bill 366 only applies to county election officers.
The intent, just to clarify, and we amended 343, we introduced this to replace 343 because the original intent of the bill was the fact that one county election official had sent out 418,000 ballots, advance ballot requests, without any individuals requesting those. They were pre-printed, had the information on it, and it was a lot of money spent unnecessarily, in my opinion. So that's why we offered this bill. Any other questions? Senator Blasey?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think just to clarify, the bill is to just ensure that taxpayer dollars, for example, in my home county, we spent a lot of taxpayer dollars sending ballots to people who didn't request one. Instead, we could use that money to put in more machines and more polling sites, which I believe is very important. So everyone knows when election day is, but we don't need to be sending out ballots on taxpayer expense. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. Committee, we've got about 30 minutes left, and for the sake of efficiency and time, what I'm going to do is break up the time rather than restrict each individual who wants to talk to a certain time limit. I'm just going to give a block to the proponents of 15 minutes, a block to the opponents of 15 minutes. You can divide it up however you want. You can collude with your fellow proponents or opponent testimony, and we will have a one neutral that we'll throw in there from Secretary of State's. So what I'll do is I'll set my clock here for 15 minutes for the proponents, and if it gets close to time, I'll give you a 1-minute cue so that you know, and then we'll cut it off at 15 minutes. So first up, first oral proponent is Charlotte O'Hara, Johnson County Commissioner, testifying as a private citizen. And when you do come up and testify, just restate your name and position. And 15 minutes will start right now, Charlotte.
Good morning. Well, I want to report that I did survive driving up in the fog, and then I did survive the car eating potholes that I encountered. So all is well. And I also want to just briefly tell you that religious Easter eggs are not allowed at the White House Easter egg hunt this coming year. Just wanted to keep you up to date what's happening outside of the Capitol. Okay, so again, I'm Charlotte O'Hara. I live in Overland Park. I am the County Commissioner for District 3, but I am not representing the county. This is on my own opinion. When the U.S. Postal Service fails in delivering mail, our country is slow walking to disaster. And you may wonder why I'm talking about the mail service on this bill, and the reason is because this is about mail-in ballots. In the Kansas City area, our mail service is a disaster. There are days on end that I do not get my mail. It is an absolute disaster. I have tenants who mail me checks. It'll be postmarked the 5th. This one, January the 5th, I didn't receive it until the 16th. And so I think that as you go forward, you're going to have to expand your policy on mail-in ballots. But I want to specifically talk about what has happened in Johnson County. And Fred Sherman, this has also been called the Fred Sherman bill, but not only is Johnson County responding to advanced mail-in ballot requests from registered voters in Johnson County, but last year, our county election commissioner chose to send out 417,856 pre-filled in advanced ballots requests. He did this on his own authority, solely on his own authority. He did not check with the Secretary of the State. Secretary of State, in testimony in previous Senate hearings, has stated that they did not support this. And I want to just give you a quote from a text that Election Commissioner Sherman sent me. This was in response to a question. We were able to utilize a sweet nonprofit USPS rate, application mailer invoice costs. Printing, $65,417.51. Postage, $65,638.18. Total cost, $131,055.69 for the total pieces of $417,856, and the cost per piece is 31.4 cents. So where do I even begin? Security. What's happening within the U.S. Postal Service when this mail is just floating around for who knows how many days? This is a very serious concern. And the security concerns of mail-in ballots is already the weakest link in our election process. Authority. Why would the state stand mute while local county election commissioners unilaterally mail 417,865 pre-filled advanced ballot applications without consulting and or receiving approval from the Secretary of State? Fiscal. Perhaps the election commissioner believes that he received a sweet deal from USPS, but perhaps not incurring the cost of $131,055.69 would have been a sweeter deal for the Johnson County taxpayers. I strongly urge you to work this bill, prohibit the mass mailing of filled advanced ballot applications from our local election commissioners and send SB 366 to the floor for a vote to begin bringing sanity back into our elections. And I just want to prove to you that I went out to my mailbox on Sunday night, and the mail had been delivered that should have been delivered Wednesday. And here is my shopper guide that was 5 days late. So that just really shows you what is happening in our mail service. It's a disaster.
Thank you, Charlotte. We're about 4 minutes deep into this, so remaining proponent next is Kelly Weiler. And I think Kelly's on WebEx. Let's go ahead, Kelly. Can you hear me? Okay. Go right ahead, Kelly. You've got about, we want to leave a little time for Q&A afterwards, so you've got about 10 minutes max. But leave some time for some other folks too, if you can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Kelly Wire. I live in Prairie Village, and I recently ran for my city council. And I am giving my testimony in support of SB 366. Americans want to feel that their vote matters, and mail-in ballots are ripe with fraud and are easily accessible to fraud. We have ballot drop boxes. Are all of those under surveillance with cameras? How do we know there is not ballot harvesting happening or someone signing a mail-in ballot for a deceased person? I never saw myself running for office. There was a hot button issue for the November 7th, 2023 election that I was passionate about, and it was rezoning. I decided to run because I care about my city and my ward in Prairie Village. Sometimes the margins can be so small that it is important to know that all of the votes are legitimate. I say that because I lost the Prairie Village City Council election for Ward 6 by only 33 votes. Once all the votes were counted and I was down, I say that because I lost by only 33 votes and I was down only 14 votes on the night of the election. Fred Sherman, the Johnson County Election County Commissioner, sent around a mailer on cardstock a packet regarding the upcoming election with an application for a mail-in ballot pre-populated with the address and other voter information. Why was he spending Johnson County dollars to do this? How much did it cost our county? I went to the canvassing event for the November 7th election, and one of the Johnson County commissioners asked Fred about sending out these unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. His answer sounded to me that so long as the Secretary of State was okay with it, he would do it again. We need to try to eliminate that. We need to try to eliminate unnecessary mail-in ballots as a voting option. We have advanced voting for days. We have election day voting. I understand that some people need to vote by mail, but it does not need to be so widespread. There are so many checks and balances with in-person voting. You give your driver's license, you sign your name, you verify your address and name. These checks and balances do not exist with the mail-in ballots. What signature on file are we using with mail-in ballots? I believe when I get my driver's license, I sign with a stylus on an electronic pad. This signature never looks quite as authentic as the one I do on paper. Is this the signature we are using? Additionally, the unsolicited applications that were sent to all of Johnson County in 2023 had pre-populated name, address, date of birth to every household with registered voters, including households that are now or used to be rental properties. Just think, in a span of 8 years, how many people may have come and gone. Mailing out all of these unsolicited applications is an irresponsible act that unsafely and unnecessarily exploits the personal identity of voters. Our elections need to be as secure as possible. The people need to be heard. Mail-in ballots are not secure. I would be much more comfortable with paper, in-person ballots, but at the very least, we should nearly eliminate mail-in ballots except where absolutely necessary. There is too much room for fraud and abuse with mail-in ballots. We need confidence in our elections, and I am fully in support of this new bill to put more checks and balances on mail-in ballots and eliminate unrequested solicitation of mail-in ballot applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And again, we'll hold for questions still after we hear all the proponents. Next up is Wallace Boersma. I guessed right. And you got a couple minutes, Wallace.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My name is Wallace Boersma. Getting old.
I understand.
I'm a resident of Prairie Village, Kansas, and was recently a candidate for Ward 2 City Council. Before the election, the 3 members of my family that are registered voters received pre-filled out applications for advanced voting ballot by mail. As a first-time candidate, I was initially confused. We were concerned about voter integrity and still are after hearing multiple stories and reading numerous news articles about voter fraud in regard to mail-in ballots. As my family continued to discuss these applications, we realized that a significant portion of our private information was pre-filled out on the applications. As previous victims of identity theft and having gone through a significant amount of time and financial costs to deal with identity theft, we recognize the recklessness of mailing these pre-filled out applications. Will the state of Kansas or Johnson County cover residents' identity theft expenses? Then I learned it cost over $65,000 to send out these pre-filled out applications. Too often I hear from bureaucrats and politicians that smaller government expenditures are inconsequential. I believe the opposite. My beliefs and concerns are that mailing the pre-filled out applications for an advanced voting ballot in Johnson County, Kansas was costly, reckless, cast doubt on the election, and perpetuated a lack of confidence and uncertainty in the election process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wallace. I think we have one other last-minute change, adding Kim Gish. Kim, you've got a couple minutes real fast.
Yes, I do not have a written form to see if I will make sure I get it to you. Okay. My name is Kim Gish. I am a grassroots volunteer in Sedgwick County. For the last 15 years, I have been a canvasser for many candidates here in Sedgwick County itself. This last election for school board, for the last 5 years, to let you know, I have been as quote unquote chasing ballots, to where I would pay the election office a certain fee, and I would be able to receive the amount of the addresses, names, and the party affiliation of the people that are receiving the advanced ballots that are going to be going to their house. Probably as you know, as chasing the ballots, we try to get to their doorstep to let them know of our candidate that is trying to get into office, to try to let them know the reason why they would need to vote for our candidate. As the first day of this last one for the election was October the 18th. And what I've experienced in the last 5 years of chasing ballots is that the first 1, 2, 3 days that we receive the advanced ballots and the addresses is usually the heaviest time that we would have that, and that would be for people that previously have sent in their application. Usually after that, in my experience, it would dwindle down to 10, 15, and to let you know of this district that I was heavily canvassing for a school board. It was a small district in southeast Wichita, and as I was going and throughout even a week, the amount of names that we were getting from the advanced ballots was still 30, 40, 50. Usually by that time, we would get like 10, 12 people. Still, after a week and a half, we were still getting 40, 50, 60 people and trying to chase them at the door. I do have and I will send this to you. I do have one of the lists that I was following as I was chasing the ballots. And what I had noticed is that it was very, very biased of the doorsteps that I was going toward as far as Democrat and unaffiliated voters. And once I had realized that it was so saturated versus the Republicans that were getting advanced ballots, I would be asking people at the door if they were a registered Democrat, how did you receive these advanced ballots? Did you call it in? They said, no, we just got them in the mail. So after 2, 3, 4 doors, I had called a friend of mine who is an unaffiliated, and I had asked her, who lives in Sedgwick County. Okay. I had asked her how many did she receive, and she received 4 in the mail and never requested it. So I am here to support Senate Bill 366 for the part of people that, if we are going to be able to send these out, it needs to be fair, and it is not a fair way to be able to do this.
Okay. Thank you, Kim, and make sure you get your written testimony into Sheila and
I'll do that.
coordinate with her. Okay, committee, we have 11 written-only proponents listed for your review. And I'm going to open it up now to any questions for our oral proponents. Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These questions will go to Charlotte. Charlotte, thank you. In your testimony, you have here there were mailed out 417,856 pre-filled advance mail-in ballot applications.
Applications.
Okay, so these were not actual ballots?
No, they were applications.
Okay, can you tell me the difference of that?
Well, the difference is that the application has to be filled out. It was pre-filled. There were still some items that needed to be filled out by the individual. Then they would mail that back to the election office, and then they would receive their ballot back.
Okay, and can you define what information was pre-filled?
I believe that the name, birth date, address, the social security number, as far as I know, was not included. Is that right? Where's Clay? Okay.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. Mr. Chairman, do we have a copy of one of these pre-filled ballots that we can make available? There is one in the testimony.
On the testimony.
Okay, okay, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Any other questions? Senator Faust-Goodell.
My question is for Charlotte as well. So Mr. Chairman, I do agree 100% that the mail takes forever. So
It's
when
a
I
wreck.
mail out a newsletter from the state printer here in Topeka, it goes all the way to Kansas City, Mr. Chairman. So 6,000 constituents I mailed a newsletter to, and it went all the way to Kansas City and then was rerouted back here and then mailed to my constituents in Wichita and Sedgwick County. And it took a month for that to happen. So we need to really get on the United States Postal Service to fix that. I don't know. But my questions too are like Senator Cluse. So I live in Sedgwick County, and I have received the advance ballot, and you're exactly right. It has your name, address, birth date, and then you actually have to fill in your last 4 digits of your social and sign your signature and date it, and then mail it back, and then thereby you'll receive the advance ballot in the mail. But Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask, do you remember, because I do, and I actually have the application. I brought it with me. I actually have a copy of it in my office. I'll bring it back when we work the bill so you can see exactly, and it has my name on it. But didn't this start? I know our election commission in Sedgwick County, I know that Wichitans, we started to receive those applications during COVID when nobody really could get out. And so I don't really think that it was done to Democrat or Republican but it was sent out because we were all stuck at home. Do you agree or not?
Well,
agree?
in Johnson County, we never had the election commissioner mail out an advance ballot request unless we had a specific request from a specific voter. This was the first time that there was this mass mailing. So it had no connection. It had no connection with COVID at all. This was just a unilateral decision at the election commission level, and that cost the taxpayers of Johnson County over $131,000. Basically $65,000 in printing costs, $65,000 in mailing costs. But it had nothing to do with COVID.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Charlotte, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Should have caught you before.
Hour on the bike. I mean, I try to keep in shape so that I can be jumping up and down to answer questions.
So it appears to me like we've got 2 concerns here. One is a security issue and one is a cost issue. And I am much more concerned about cost than I am security. But I want to make sure I understand this. You are not asking the legislature to get involved in local control in your budgets, right?
I'm asking the legislature to be the adult in the room and say, absolutely, you do not mail unsolicited advanced ballot applications out of the election commission's office. It's an unnecessary expense.
The cost of it concerns me, but that is a county budget, not a state budget.
But this is state statute, and you have many specific requirements within the state statute. This is where the buck stops, right here, is that you have to take the responsibility to put it into statute that this is not going to occur.
I just want to make sure that I understood that you're not asking us to get involved in local control.
I'm asking you as a state legislature to put this additional requirement within the state statute.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else?
Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Okay, we do have neutral oral testimony from Clay Barker, and we'll have Clay come up and make a few comments about this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State, and I'll make my comments brief. I think the counties will have a lot more detail for you. I just have 4 points. First, an update on that lawsuit about the legislation from 2021. It went to oral argument at the 10th Circuit last week, and we couldn't really tell from the questions which way that court's leaning, and we'll just have to wait and see. Second, and I think the principal issue here is mailing out advanced mail ballot applications, whether they're pre-populated or not, is usually a county decision. And one county clerk from a medium-sized rural county grabbed me this morning and said, if this bill passes, it will be a fundamental change to her operation. And again, our office is neutral on this. And it's a resource debate. Where do you spend your county money? I think a lot of county election officers are trying to use the mailings to reduce the turnout on election day, especially with a general election like this year, which could be very high. I don't know which counties do it or have. Johnson County's done it twice, once during COVID, once recently, which I think caused this bill. And Sedgwick County, for a long time, had shifted resources from polling places to mailing applications, and recently, I understand, has now shifted back. Their strategy is put more resources into polling places. Last 2 points. I've heard occasionally that people say that what Mr. Sherman did was illegal. It wasn't. Even if the law hadn't been enjoined, there was a carve-out saying county election officers could send out pre-populated. On the privacy concern, I understand people hate seeing their information on a form, but any of the data on that form is public record. I can get on a website and a couple taps, find out your birthday and your address. Driver's license, social security number is not there. And last, after reviewing the bill, and I've had people ask me questions about it, first, we don't think it has any prohibition on a county sending out a mailer that says, if you want an advanced ballot application, go to this website or call this number. So the voter would have to ask for it. And it would have no impact at all on the permanent advance list or military balloting. I just don't see it touching those at all. And Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions at any time, and I encourage the committee to listen to what the counties have to say on this. It's their operation. We're one level above it. Oh, and I'm sorry, one last point is Secretary Schwab has directed the 4 county commissioners that he has more control over to not send out advanced mail ballots unsolicited for the 3 elections this year.
So, and try to preempt any of that for this coming election, I'm guessing. Yes. Committee, any questions? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Clay, you just touched on what I was going to ask. So those 4 appointed election commissioners that are appointed by the Secretary of State, the case that they're talking about that kind of instigated all of this happened in a county with an appointed election officer. And what kind of control does that county commission have over the purse of funding these, or do they have any at all, because that election officer is appointed by the Secretary of State but funded by the county commission?
Senator, I'm not an expert on county budgeting, but the way I understand it is the county election officer in essence has 2 bosses. The Secretary of State has general supervision over elections, but the county commission and the county sets everything from personnel policies to budgeting And I just wouldn't know how Johnson County, how much detail the budget goes down to telling the commissioner what they can and can't do with the money.
Any other questions? I just have one quick question. One concern I haven't heard brought up is the fact that when you send out this many unsolicited ballots, there are going to be people who move, die, whatever. Is there any concern that, again, it's a waste of money with regard to that sort of thing?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I agree that some people will have moved and either the ballot application will be sent back, which then can help remove people from the voter rolls, or just gets thrown in the trash. I think that's a known issue. I don't know, I can't quantify it. Okay. And again, it'd be probably a county decision on how best to spend their money for the effect they're trying to get.
For efficiency purposes, it seems inefficient to me, but that, yeah. Okay, thank you, Clay. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For sake of time, committee, I'm sorry we're going to have to run just a little bit long, but we need to provide 15 minutes for our oral opponents. And first up, and again, we'll break this down. I'm not going to restrict any individuals to time, but we'll do a block of 15 minutes. So up next is Davis Hammett with Loud Light Civic Action for oral opponent testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to be very brief because I do want to give the counties time to speak. This bill, I first want to ask really, what is the problem and why is this the solution? So actually in Sedgwick County, I believe it was in 2008 that they started sending out advanced ballot applications to everyone, and no one really cared. It wasn't a big deal. This is largely in response to election misinformation that began around 2020 and has continued to exacerbate and cause issues. I do want to highlight just really quick, I know this language can get confusing and we all make mistakes, but it's something I hear regularly in the legislature is the misstating that these are ballots instead of applications, and that is such an important distinction. Because it's not just a distinction that's important for the legislature. This sort of misinformation and misunderstanding causes issues for organizations like mine, where we hear people saying they got ballots that they didn't apply for, and then we dig in and we find out they're just talking about the application. And I know the Secretary of State and counties deal with that all the time. So a lot of this is about people just misunderstanding the process. The other thing I was going to mention, particularly because this is about Johnson County, is that counties do balance all the forms of voting opportunities they give to voters. And in Johnson County, they're essentially relying on at least half of the voters to use in-person or mail ballots. And they've reduced poll sites from around, I think it was 220 about 5-6 years ago, to now they only have 150 polling sites. So if you were to do this, especially right before this upcoming election, you would have a huge capacity issue, and they would have to expand polling sites. They would have to buy all the equipment, which can cost millions of dollars and staff all of those polling sites. And the last thing I'll mention here is there are unique situations that happen. You can imagine a situation where it's right before, it's a month before the election and a poll site burns down, and the county might not be able to find a close poll site to replace that. And so they say, we're going to send all of the voters that would be affected a mail ballot application just so that they aren't disturbed and still have the opportunity to vote. These type of crisis situations are unique, and when the legislature is too broad in how it blocks counties from doing stuff, it can make a crisis situation even worse, result in lawsuits and other things like that. So we do consider this in the totality of it a voter suppression bill and how it is likely to impact, especially given the rapid timeline that we're facing. And I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate. Thank you.
We'll do it at the end of the block. Yeah, thank you. Rick Fifo's up next, Harvey County Clerk and Election Official. Rick?
I guess it's on. Yes, my name is Rick Pifo. I'm the Harvey County Clerk and Election Officer. I'm also the Chair of the Elections Committee for the Kansas County Clerks and Elections Officials Association. We're here to oppose this bill for a few reasons. We think it's a local control issue. Some counties, there are there are some counties that do this regularly. As has been mentioned before, Sedgwick County did it for years. They've now flipped back to not doing it. And as far as the financial side, I think a lot of times you can say it costs $131,000, but there's probably a financial offset to reducing polling places, poll workers, equipment. And that's how it worked in Sedgwick County, I know, for years. Their commission would have a discussion about, are we going to do advance apps or are we going to increase polling places? So I think there's a financial offset. In my case, or most counties that I know of did these applications in 2020 pandemic year, trying to reduce the number of voters at the polling places. This was a way to reduce those numbers so that we would have less people potentially getting infected. But some of that was done with federal dollars. For my county, there's not a financial offset. I would still have to have the same number of polling places, and I already don't have very long lines, so I'm not reducing the lines. So it doesn't make sense for me to do on a regular basis an advance application. But usually these are not just advance applications either. Most of these, like when I did mine in 2020, it was a voter information piece that said, okay, here's the information on voting in person. Here's the information on voting early in person. Here's the information if you want to vote advance by mail. The only reason an application was enclosed was because that was the only way that, of the different ways to vote, that was the only one that required a piece of paper to make it happen. The other ones, you just go vote in person. Or but then there's also in here the provision about not pre-filling or pre-populating. Handwritten applications, I don't know how many, if you get thousands of applications, a lot of them are very difficult to read. So if we can help that in any way by putting their name or limited amount of information on there, it helps us to process them on the back end. There's also in Elvis, our voter registration system, if a disabled person or somebody wants to be on permanent advance calls, we can go in the system, and while their record is up, we can actually print a pre-populated advance application that has everything except for the reason that they're requesting and their signature and date. And then we send that to them. So they've requested it, but we're pre-filling it out for them. Or we also occasionally have voters that come in person and want to fill out an application. Sometimes their handwriting may not be very good, so we offer to assist them. This would not allow us to even assist them with filling out the application. So I would gladly stand for questions when appropriate.
All right. Thank you, Rick. We'll go on. We've got two more oral proponents, and then we'll open to questions. Next up is via WebEx. We have Aaron Woods. Aaron, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Okay.
We've got about, you got plenty of time, but
Okay.
keep it brief if you can.
Will do. All right. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. As he said, my name is Aaron Woods, and I live in Leawood. I'm here to urge you to vote against Bill SB 366 that would prevent our local election offices from providing comprehensive voter education by mail. I volunteer with a voter turnout project in Kansas, and from that project, I've learned two important things. And many people I know do not vote in every election, but more people do vote when they understand the voting process. So the volunteer work I do requires basically one thing: educating voters on the voting process to make it as simple as possible for them to make a plan to vote. So to encourage people to vote, I share things such as advanced in-person voting info, how to find a sample ballot, where to find an advanced ballot application, deadlines for submitting those applications, and also the first day ballots are sent out by the election office. And I receive so much positive feedback from people telling me that the information that I shared really helped them make a plan to vote. So everything I share with them is publicly available information. It's just not at their fingertips when they need it. So all this is to say how excited and impressed I was when I found a comprehensive voter guide from my local election office in my mailbox before the most recent election. So excited, in fact, that I saved it because I thought it was such good information. So this mailer that I'm hearing everyone talking about, it included much more than just the ballot application. So, when talking about the cost as well, it's not just about that application that was in there. They spent the money on educating voters. Every piece of information that I share with voters was now on people's kitchen counters. They didn't have to find the website and navigate multiple tabs to learn about their voting options or potentially miss deadlines. Every voter in my house received one, and it was a great reminder to my son, who was heading off to college in a few weeks, to fill out his application. And I'm sure everyone on this committee supports increasing voter turnout. And I'm guessing the main concern, and it kind of sounds, it could be potential fraud, but there should be no concerns with that. Our local election offices in Kansas have controls in place for advanced ballot applications and the ballots themselves. These same controls are in place whether a voter requests an application or whether they received it in the mail. And the advanced ballot application we received in the mail was no different than the one that could be pulled off the election website. The information that was pre-filled and everything was no different than that. So when my son filled out his application, he still had to enter his driver's license and sign the application. And then, of course, the election office then followed their same procedures for signature matching and all of that they do with applications. And in fact, I can attest that they do this because they rejected my daughter's application the year before when they felt like her signature didn't match her voter registration card. So our election offices have the necessary controls in place to ensure voting by mail is a secure method of voting, whether the application was sent by the election office or to the voter, or if the voter requested it. And I believe we should not be legislating the manner in which a local election office chooses to educate voters on their options for voting and making, whether it be via their website or if they choose to educate their voters in the mail, as they did with this mailer. So the mailer, it is, and I included it in testimony. I don't know if anyone else did, but here it shows the 3 different ways you can vote, whether early in person, on election day, or by mail. And then it does have the application inside and some great information. Showed all the voting locations, the times for voting advanced in person, and other really helpful information. I was just super impressed by it, and really appreciated that our election office went to that extent to educate voters to increase voter turnout, which I really think is what all of us should be striving for. And so I encourage you to vote no on SB 366, and I can answer any questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Finally, we have Seal King from the League of Women Voters. Seal, you got a couple minutes. She's also online, I believe, via WebEx. Seal, can you hear us? That was Erin you brought up there. Okay, Seal, go ahead and speak so we can hear you. You're muted. We think you're muted. There we go. We got it. Are you there, Seal?
So I'm here now. You can hear me now?
We can hear you now. We sure can. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Seal King. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Kansas. And we ask that you vote no on Senate Bill 366. And like Kelly and Mr. FIFO and Davis Hammett, we have very similar concerns. It's one, you're taking away control from the counties on how they best run their elections. And 2, that where you say that this is a cost that's not justified in some counties, it could very well offset what the counties actually experience. A bulk mailing, especially as Kelly was describing it, has much more information than just the advanced ballot application. It also tells voters the other options on how to vote and where to vote and the times to vote. And can you imagine getting 100,000 telephone or email requests for applications to have the ballot sent to them, and the staff it would take to do that, and then getting handwritten applications back? I know I've dealt with a number of handwritten applications as my term with the League of Women Voters, and it's often trying to decipher the impossible. And so I urge you to vote no on this bill. And we again think it's voter suppression. And the voters really like to have the option on how to vote. I've even talked to a number of young parents who say, yeah, they'd really like to have those ballots sent to them so that they can take care of learning about the candidates in their own time, in their own space, and have comfort in knowing that they have chosen the candidate that they really do want to vote for, rather than being forced to vote in 5 minutes in a polling booth where they realize there's candidates on that ballot that they don't really know anything about.
Okay.
So thank you for your time.
All righty. Thank you, Seal. Committee, we have also 4 written opponents' testimony available in your packet. And at this time, I'm going to open up to questions for our opponents from the committee. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Erin. Are we able to bring her back?
Should be able to. Yeah, is Erin still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for saving the copy of that form that went out because I was trying to remember what all was on that card. If I remember correctly, what you were stating is that there was information not just about voting by mail, but other options of voting and basic information about voting in general. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. It was extremely comprehensive. I was I was very pleased to know that that was going out to voters as I explained in my testimony, the work that I do, I'm just surprised. I think we all assume voting is really an easy process. You just show up on election day, but that doesn't work for everybody. And understanding all of the different options that are available to you and being able to make a plan is really helpful. And of course, all that information is out on my county's website, but it takes a lot of navigating. And I just, from my experience in helping people, it's not easy. And so, yeah, I was very impressed. Like I said,
my question is,
I'm kind of a nerd.
My question is actually this. Don't we normally in Johnson County receive some type of card or something in the mail stating that an election is coming up?
Yes, I was thinking about that because we do receive that card, and that card does have our name and address on it. But it, probably I don't have a copy of that, but I assume it has a link to the website. But
all right, this just seemed to me like a cost-effective way to outline the different ways that voting is available in Johnson County, because there are cards normally sent anyway, and this one just ended up being more comprehensive, providing information. So I thank you for that. And then my next question, last week, didn't we have a major snow and ice storm in Johnson County?
Yes.
Okay.
Lots of schools were closed and things like that, yes.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because I know, sometimes there are issues with the mail, but I know schools were closed, businesses were shut down last week, so maybe that's not the most effective barometer as far as mail delivery based upon the situation. And then, the only other thought I have on this too is that it feels like this bill takes away the ability of local county officials to send out the mailer, and that's a trusted source, and now would only put it in the hands of third parties, which probably are less credible. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fasquedel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm against waste. I hate it when my daughters would throw away food, and so I get that part of it. I have a clarifying question for either Jason or either someone from the Secretary of State's office, but my question is actually for Davis Hammond. If you would make your way to the podium, please. I'm going to talk really fast. So just for clarification, or since you're at the podium, so speaking of Sedgwick County, Mr. Chairman, I know that some advanced applications went out in the mail to my constituents in a inner city area because the 9th Street Health Department and another location, they had major construction going on, and so nobody could get over in that area. So they mailed out the application for the advance ballot to allow that person to be able to, those individuals to be able to cast their votes, exercise their right to vote. So in situations like that, is that why you're saying we need to leave it to local control?
Yes, so there was also a bill passed, I think in 2021 following the pandemic, that also already removed some of the ability of the Secretary of State and counties to make sort of emergency decisions. You know, a tornado comes, whatever it is. So there's already a limited arsenal of what a county can do in an unexpected crisis whenever election day is coming. So exactly like your example, there might be a situation where not on the, you know, it's no fault to the voters, but something has happened and their normal voting routine is not going to be possible. And it's going to be very disruptive, and every day is of the essence. And so the county might want to notify all of those people, your polling site has changed, here's your option, which, you know, you think about even back to Dodge City in 2018, your option might be, you know, completely outside of town. So it might not even be for many voters a logistically possible option that is put forth. And so having the mail ballots application sent to voters gives an outlet to sort of relieve the pressure that could happen from unexpected circumstances.
Thank you, Davis Hammond. And Mr. Chairman, so I don't know staff or Secretary of State's office, just clarify for me one more time. Is this eliminating the Secretary of, or it's asking the Secretary of State to make all election offices not mail out the application for the advanced ballot? But to clarify, who does this affect again? So an individual like Aaron, who just spoke, that group could mail something out educating people, correct?
Correct.
But the Election Commission could or couldn't. Please clarify. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Senator, the way I understand the bill is that it's a blanket prohibition on counties sending out advance mail ballot applications unless they're requested. Our office never sends those out unless someone requests it, and then we have to make sure they send it to the county. It really wouldn't restrict our office in any way because it's directly regulating the counties.
Well, go ahead and ask. You can go ahead and ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, but isn't this legislation saying that the counties, Charlotte wants you to tell the election commissions not to do that? Is that right?
I can't speak for Commissioner O'Hara, but in addition to whether this bill passes or not, Secretary Schwab has told the 4 commissioners who he has more control over for the 3 elections in 2024, do not send out applications unless they're requested. But that would have no effect on the other 101 counties.
That really, it's a matter of policy, basically. Right. It's a matter of whether we decide as a state that we don't want them to do that or not, really, bottom line. Correct. So, any other questions? Senator Reichman?
Time is short and long or whatever. I understand on both sides of this issue, but my concern is when they're sending out a application and it's filled out, other people can get that information. I also understand if I sent this in, my application, I would not mind for them to fill out because they can't read my handwriting. But that's not necessarily what's going to happen anyway. I can see where there is people are concerned with fraud of sending them out unsolicited. So my question is for people in there, let's say there's 4 applications come in. Is there a check that only one ballot would go back out to help relieve the minds of other people who are in here? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Our statewide voter registration system that every one of the 105 counties uses and uses to track advanced ballot applications that come in stops any employee of any election office from sending out a ballot without a big flash red warning, this person has already been mailed a ballot. So there are multiple instances within the system that say that. There are multiple instances in county processes that prevent that. And if 2 ballots, say all of our checks and balances fail, there's another check and balance when they come back in, because every county balances every ballot against every application, every election. And so we've got multiple checks and balances, and in my lifetime in the Secretary of State's office, I have never seen a ballot come in from someone that didn't have an application on file.
One other, and then we'll probably have to call it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I just have to say this real quick. So, and I normally, I won't contest or rebut what the good Senator Reichman has said. However, I'm constantly shredding things I get in the mail, insurance policies, credit card policies, all of them already have all of my information on it already. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'll just close with this. We passed legislation that the Secretary, our elections commissions will, if they cannot verify signatures, they are required to try to contact that voter to confirm that signature. Also, Mr. Chairman, I will remind people that there are some people who still don't, because of their age or their handwriting, they don't write well. Some are still illiterate where they don't read well. And we do have laws that allows individuals, for others at the election office, can fill out their information and they still are marking just with a mark. So with the 21st century, everything I get in the mail already has all of my information on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, thank you for your indulgence today. Tomorrow we have budgets, and we are adjourned.